Greetings, beautiful viewers. This is Smitten, and fuck! Are we already done too? Greetings, beautiful viewers. This is Smitten. If you guys are enjoying the content, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Welcome to episode 3 of Gettin' Smitten, my series where we are tracing back through my life, starting at the very beginning, running all the way to level 30. Yes, I am dinging to level 30 this year. Today we are reviewing ages 4 and 5 of my life. This is a time period where my sister is born and I am actually introduced into kindergarten and doing a bunch of different random things here. The reason why I have these weird groupings for the ages is because if I keep grouping it the way that I'm grouping it, I'm going to run out of episodes before I turn 30. So don't worry, there's going to be a new episode every week. Some things are going to be more thematic than it is chronological. So just a heads up, heads up, heads up.
Oh, Lord Smitters.
So what happened last episode? Well, we talked about my first family unit, which was my biological mother, my biological father. We were a family unit for a couple of years, and then they got divorced when I was 3, and then my mom married my stepfather, and that's where we left off. So age 4 is actually an interesting age because of my very first memory that happened at age 4. My very first memory, and it's like little tiny flicker of cognition, and I don't know what was necessarily going on. I do very perfectly remember this one moment, and I was sitting on top of a staircase with my cousin. I was 4 years old, and I remember it being really bright, and I was sitting on the staircase, and I had a book with my cousin, and I was looking at her, and then she looked back at me, and then somebody came down the staircase. And that's my first memory. Like, it's there's no context, there's no actual story. It's just, I remember that moment so perfectly, and I wish I could have some context for what was happening at the time, because surely something was happening in that moment that kind of like made me poof into consciousness. But we don't know. Also, whenever I was 4 years old, I lived on, me and my stepfather and my biological mother, we moved and lived on an ostrich farm. An ostrich farm, yes, in the middle of Oklahoma, no less. It wasn't in the city that I was born in. We actually moved, gosh, probably about 30 minutes away for this ostrich farm, but I remember the ostrich farm. I remember the big, like, the ostriches are tall. They're tall and they look mean. They look mean as shit. And I always remember, and I was like a wee babe. I was 4 years old, so I was like super small Smitten. And I remember being afraid of those birds. And we had a horse. And there's a very specific memory that I have attached to that horse. It was like this big reddish brown horse, and I remember it was just massive. You know, of course, when you're 4 years old, the world is fucking huge. But I remember looking up at this horse and just being like, oh my god, it's the biggest, it's the biggest animal I've ever seen in my life. And I remember there was one day, it was a spring day, and I'm being little mean. I'm just running around on the farm, kind of doing whatever. I'm hanging out with my parents as they're probably doing something with the ostriches. And I remember I went over to the pasture where the horse was kept, and always kind of like hung out close to the giant like steel gate. And I would sit down underneath this tree that was overhanging the steel gate. And I would sit down in front, like next to this tree, and I would just watch this horse, and I would just watch him like graze and just kind of move around and like interact with its environment. And I was just so captivated by it, and I was just like, oh, when do I get to ride it? Because, you know, when you're a kid, you're watching all those crazy shows, and I always, like, I didn't have a pony, I had a giant fucking horse, and I was like, oh, I'm too little to ride it, it's upsetting. But there's this one time that I was out there underneath the tree, watching the horse, to which I do not know its name. It's just the horse. The horse is the name, the horse. I was sitting out in front of the gate, and I remembered this mound of dirt kind of positioned perfectly where I would normally sit and watch the horse. And I remember walking over to it and sitting. I was like, oh, this is perfect. And I sat right down on this little dirt pile in front of the gate, and I was sitting there, and I had my little arms crossed, and I'm sitting here just like gazing at this horse, being in absolute awe. And then all of a sudden, I feel the hottest stinging pinch of my fucking life at that point, and it just came in and just right on my bottom. And I shot up and I was like, oh my god, I was like screaming and crying. I was like, I had no idea what happened to me. And I looked down at that dirt mound that I sat on, and it was a red ant hill. Red ants are fucking awful. They are the bane of your existence when you live out in the middle of fucking nowhere. And I sat down on a giant pile of them and I had my ass bitten by a fire ant, and it freaked me out. I remember holding my butt. I was like running up. I was like, Mom, I'm dying. I was pretty sure it was like a snake or something poisonous. I was pretty sure my butt was gonna fall off. My life was over. But you know how 4-year-olds are, all dramatic and stuff. I was no different and probably more dramatic. I loved that horse though. Why can't I remember his name? It was like one of my favorite. It was like one of the only things to do. I was on an ostrich fucking farm. The only thing to do is sit there and watch that horse. The other memory that I have from this time, and it's not necessarily like an active memory, one that I held on to. It's actually on video. They recorded me on a cassette tape. Those giant little camcorders from like the early 90s. There's a video of me burying our barn cat in hay. I'm in the barn and I'm burying this tiny kitten in hay as like small little. I was a tiny child. I was a little kid, and I'm just blonde and curly, and I'm just like just being spazzy. And my mom's sitting there and she's trying to talk to me. She's like, BB. By the way, BB is my nickname for my family. You'll probably hear me reference to myself as B or BB several times throughout the series because everybody calls me that in my family. So I remember my mom being like, BB, and I was just ignoring her, and I was just playing with this cat, and she goes, BB, you're gonna have a sister soon. Wow, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? And I remember being like, oh, I don't know. And I was just like replying with like random things, and then what do you want to name your sister? And I remember saying like Brad, or like it was like some sort of B male name, and it was just my sister loves watching that video because she's always like, look at you don't give a shit. I was just like, nope, burying that cat. That's a perfect segue into introducing the next character of our series, and that is my sister, who is 4 years younger than me. Oh god, the stories that I have of me and my sister. Some of them are going to be inappropriate, and I can't wait to share them all with you. I remember my sister being born very vividly. It was at a time in my life where we had, like, at this point, we had moved off the ostrich farm, and we're back in my hometown. And my stepfather was starting up his very first restaurant with his partner, just like right down the street from where we lived. And my sister was born the same year, so it was like there were like several different changes all at once during this year of my life, 4 years old. This first sister, she's a hoot. I remember her being born very vividly because I was young and confused and upset. And I remember visiting my mom in the hospital and just being really freaked out because I'm pretty sure it was like my first visit to the hospital, and there's pictures of me holding this giant bouquet, and I'm wearing this 80s jean jacket, the kind of jean jacket you can only find in the 80s. I'm wearing this jean jacket, and I have this bouquet of flowers for my mom, and my eyes are all wide, and I'm just like freaked out. I'm just like, oh god, what's happening? I remember the first time I saw my sister, and she was the most beautiful baby I've still ever seen. She had these big old blue eyes and this dark, full head of hair, and she was just perfect and quiet. And I hated her. And I don't know why. I hated her. She was perfect. It's like just like I was like, this is gonna change stuff. I knew immediately in that moment when I was a kid that my sister being born was gonna change everything, and it absolutely did. Ah, God, I was such a little shit. The stories that I have to tell you about the things that I've done to my little sister. Oh my god, you would think that we were brothers by the stories that I'm going to divulge in this series about me and this sister of mine. You would think that we were brothers just based off the kind of like crass, like aggressive, like interaction and playtime that we had together. I remember there was one time when she was very, very little. She was still in a crib. She, like I said, when she was born, she had this beautiful full head of hair and just like absolutely gorgeous. And like my mom and my stepdad and like my aunts and my uncles and my grandparents and everybody was just coming over to the house all the time, and they're just so like, oh, let me see the baby, let me see the baby. And I was just like, hey, I'm here too. I know I'm the other guy's kid, but hey, I'm still here too. What's going on, guys? And I think a part of me when I was a kid was afraid that like, because she was like, my sister was born, she was my replacement with my mom and her new family. You know what I mean? Like, I was a child from another relationship, and I always, 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 from this moment forward, felt like an outsider. I always felt like I was the third wheel to my own family. And whether it was something that made me feel that way, you know, as to like maybe something my stepdad or my mom or somebody said to me, it kind of triggered that, or it was just my own interpretation of my reality and what was going on in my life at that time. And that is entirely fucking possible, because as we will find out, I'm actually batshit crazy. I always felt like an outsider, like the black sheep in my family. I don't really look like any of them. I do a little bit in the face, but like just body wise, I was very different, and it just kind of it spirals into this beautiful mess later, and you'll see. But I remember one time when my sister was sleeping in the crib. I don't feel good about this one. I should tell you now. I don't feel good about this story, but it happened, and you should know. I was really upset with the idea that, you know, they were having a family unit without me, and that she was my replacement. So there was one night I snuck into my sister's bedroom and I chewed up an entire pack of Bubblicious bubblegum, and I took that wad of gum out of my mouth and I just all up in my sister's hair, and then snuck out of her room and went to bed. And I woke up the next morning, my mom was screaming. She was like, "Oh my, Bailey! Bailey!" She was like, "What did you do?" And I was like, "Wasn't me, Mom. I don't know. She probably chewed up all that gum herself, and, you know, like fell asleep with it. Like you always tell me not to, Mom. Pretty sure that's what she did. She fell asleep with gum in her mouth, and now it's all up in her hair." And my mom freaked out. She like got my sister out of her crib, and I remember like going outside, and like 20 minutes later I like came in and like snuck into the bathroom where my mom was, and I peeked in through the door, and my little baby sister's sitting in the bathtub, and she's covered in peanut butter. Absolutely covered in peanut butter, as my mom's sitting here trying to like pull all the fucking gum out of her hair. Oh god. Such a shitter. But I was 4. All right, I was 4. After that, we moved back to my hometown. My sister was born. My stepfather started his first like restaurant, and then I hit kindergarten. Kindergarten, I remember vaguely. I remember just a couple of different things from kindergarten, and namely, it's this one story. Now, whenever I was this tiny, tiny, itty bitty, I was always wearing dresses. I was like probably your definition of a girly girl. I was always like dresses and skirts, and I always had to have my hair all cute. And I remember there was this one day I was walking around the playground. There's like the wood beams that kind of keep in all of like the sand or the just the stuff that they put on the playground. Sometimes it's mulch, like the wood chips. Sometimes they kept wood chips inside the playground area where the actual like jungle gyms and stuff like that were. But I remember walking on the wood planks that kind of outlined the playground, and I'm wearing this like white dress, and it was my favorite one. It's the only reason I remember this moment is like my favorite dress, and it has these little like little red hearts on them everywhere, and it was like poofy, and like it had lace and all sorts of like girly shit on it. And I remember I was walking around the playground with my boyfriend who I had he like came up to me, and I guess he was my boyfriend because he like came up to me and he like grabbed my hand and he was just like, you're my girlfriend. And I was just like, okay, okay. And so like he like followed up behind me, and we were both walking on these like wood planks. And I remember this other boy came over. I don't remember what specifically happened, but this other boy came over and he was just like, no, he was like, she's not your girlfriend, she's my girlfriend. And I remember looking at these two nerds, I was like, I don't even know who you guys are. And they just like immediately started fighting. They immediately started fighting. And I was like, all right. And walked away. And that was my interaction with, I don't think I ever interacted with those two boys ever again. I think that it really kind of freaked me out. I was just like, I don't know either of you, and you're both claiming that I'm your girlfriend. And I think that's whenever I was just like, what does that even mean? And I like asked my mom about it, and she was like, "Oh, that means that they love you." And I was just like, "What?" And then that's whenever I think I started to watch a lot more Disney movies and a lot more movies in general, and read a lot of stories that had to do with love, because I think I wanted to figure that out. I was just like, "What does that even mean?" Ah, that's where Smitten was born. That's where I fell in love with love. There's another moment that I remember in kindergarten very intensely. And I remember sitting, the way they had the classroom set up in kindergarten, it was basically just all these like desks. All these like tiny little wooden square desks, and everybody had one. And I remember we didn't sit at the desk that day. We went and sat at a giant table, and there were like papers in front of everything, and there were like crayons and markers and colored pencils and all that stuff. And I remember very intensely my instructor, my teacher was just like, okay guys, we're gonna start to learn how to write. Now, pick up a pen, and I want you, after a few moments, to decide whether or not you want to write with your left hand or if you want to write with your right hand. And this moment was profound to me for no reason. It was like, I was like, what if I choose wrong? And I remember asking the instructor, I was just like, what if I want to like write with my left hand? And she was just like, you can do that. And I remember being like, but what does that mean? And then she started talking about how like there's not very many like people that are left-handed. Most people choose right hand, but the people who choose left hands have a hard time with scissors. And I remember her like that. I remember her saying that very specifically. I remember being like, special scissors, fuck that. I almost wish that I was left-handed, only because it's slightly different than what normal people do, and that's the only freaking reason. That's going to wrap it up for ages 4 and 5. It was a really interesting time in my life. I don't think very many people can say that they lived and survived an ostrich farm in a red ant assault on your ass. God. It's still bothers. I can still remember that pain. It's so visceral. I hope you guys are enjoying this, because I still am, and it's really fun going back and looking at these different parts of my life and being able to kind of reach out to my family and being like, hey, do you remember what year we did that? Or hey, what did I call that horse? Or just things like that. So it's giving me an opportunity to kind of reach back out to my family, and it's actually pretty awesome. Have any of you ever even seen an ostrich? Oh shit, Smitten, just end the episode. I love you guys, and I will see you next week.